They say silence is strength, that those who speak less feel less. But silence is rarely empty. It is often crowded with things that never found a safe place to exist. There is a quiet pattern that moves through many lives unnoticed. A silent epidemic where emotions are not expressed, not because they don't exist, but because they were never allowed to breathe. What happens when feelings are buried instead of felt? When expression feels more dangerous than suppression. You may appear calm, even composed, yet something underneath remains unresolved. This is not about coldness. It is about protection. And the cost of it. Let's begin. There is a certain kind of person who appears untouched by emotional storms. They listen more than they speak. They observe without reacting. In moments where others overflow, they remain still, almost distant. From the outside, it can look like control, like maturity, like strength. But what if that stillness is not peace, but pause? Because silence, when it becomes a pattern, is rarely neutral. It is often learned, repeated, reinforced, and over time, it begins to shape how a person exists within themselves. You may not notice it at first. It hides behind phrases like, "I'm fine," or "it doesn't matter." It disguises itself as independence, as self-sufficiency, as emotional discipline. But inside, something quieter is happening. Feelings begin to lose their language, not because they disappear, but because they are never spoken. And when emotions are consistently unexpressed, they do not simply fade away. They settle, like sediment at the bottom of a river, unseen but present, building slowly over time. Have you ever felt something deeply, but couldn't explain it? Have you ever wanted to say something, but stopped yourself without knowing why? That hesitation is not random. It is patterned silence. There is no obvious pain, no dramatic collapse, just a subtle absence, a quiet disconnection between what is felt and what is shown. Life continues, conversations happen, responsibilities are fulfilled, but emotional presence feels distant. It becomes easier to think than to feel, easier to analyze than to express. Words remain carefully chosen, filtered, controlled, not because the person lacks depth, but because depth has nowhere to go. And over time, something shifts. The absence of expression starts to feel normal. Not speaking becomes easier than explaining. Not feeling becomes safer than confronting. And eventually, the silence is no longer questioned. It becomes identity. I'm just not emotional. I don't like opening up. But is that truly who you are? Or simply who you learn to become? Because silence, when it begins this way, is not a personality trait. It is a beginning. Silence does not appear without a history. It is not something a person is born with. It is something that forms slowly, quietly, in environments where emotions were not fully welcomed. Sometimes it begins in places that looked normal from the outside. A home where everything functioned, but feelings were rarely spoken. Where sadness was met with distraction instead of understanding. Where anger was labeled as disrespect. Where vulnerability felt like exposure, not safety. In such spaces, expression becomes risky. A child learns quickly what is accepted and what is not. Not through lectures, but through reactions. A dismissed feeling here, a raised voice there, a moment where tears were ignored, or worse, corrected. Stop crying. It's not a big deal. You're overreacting. These moments may seem small, but repeated over time, they begin to shape something deeper. They teach the nervous system that emotions are inconvenient, unwelcome, even dangerous. So the child adapts, not by stopping feelings, but by hiding them. Because connection matters, belonging matters, and if expressing emotions threatens that connection, the mind finds another way. It begins to filter, to suppress, to stay quiet, and the adaptation works. The child becomes easier to manage, less reactive, more composed. They are often praised for being mature or strong, but underneath that praise is a quiet misunderstanding. They are not less emotional. They are more careful with emotion. Over time, this carefulness becomes automatic. The body remembers what the mind no longer questions. Even in adulthood, when the environment has changed, the pattern remains. You may find yourself holding back without knowing why, struggling to express even when it feels safe, feeling something deeply, yet unable to translate it into words, because expression was never practiced. It was avoided, and what was once protection becomes limitation. But here is the difficult truth. The silence you carry today may not belong to your present. It may be an echo of a past where expression came with consequences. So the question is no longer, why are you like this? It becomes something quieter and more revealing. What did you have to learn to survive? What appears as emotional distance is often something far more intricate, a system working quietly beneath awareness, designed not to harm but to protect. The human mind is not built for truth. It is built for survival. And when expression once felt unsafe, the brain does not forget. It adapts. Somewhere along the way, a decision was made, not consciously but neurologically. A pattern formed where emotions were no longer something to release, but something to regulate, contain, and sometimes completely avoid. This is where defense mechanisms begin to take shape. Avoidance becomes the first layer. You stop engaging with what feels overwhelming. Conversations shift. Topics are redirected. Feelings are postponed indefinitely. Then comes emotional numbing, a gradual dimming of intensity. Not just the painful emotions, but the pleasant ones too. Joy becomes quieter. Excitement feels distant. Even connection can feel muted, as if experienced through a thin layer of glass. And sometimes there is dissociation, a subtle detachment from the present moment. You are there, but not fully, experiencing life, but not entirely inside it. These are not signs of weakness. They are signs of adaptation, because the brain, when faced with repeated emotional discomfort, begins to prioritize safety over expression. It asks a simple question: what keeps you stable? Not what helps you feel, but what helps you function. And suppression, in many cases, becomes the answer. Have you ever noticed how quickly you move away from discomfort? How instinctively you distract yourself when something feels too heavy? How certain emotions seem inaccessible, as if they belong to someone else? This is not absence. It is protection working exactly as it was designed to. But protection has a cost, because what is suppressed is not resolved. It does not disappear. It remains stored within the body, within memory, within the nervous system, waiting not for permission, but for acknowledgement. And when expression is consistently avoided, the mind begins to confuse silence with safety. But silence is not always safe. Sometimes it is simply familiar. And the most difficult part? The system that protects you is the same system that keeps you from fully feeling alive. At some point, the silence is no longer just a habit. It becomes a tension, a quiet, ongoing conflict between what is felt and what is allowed to be seen. Because emotions do not disappear simply because they are hidden. They remain active beneath the surface, pressing gently at first, then persistently. And when expression is denied, those emotions begin to turn inward. This is where the inner war begins. On one side, there is the part of you that feels. The part that wants to speak, to release, to be understood. The part that aches quietly when something matters. And on the other side, there is the part that restrains. That says, stay composed. That's not necessary. Keep it together. These two forces rarely meet in harmony. Instead, they create friction. You may notice it in moments where words almost escape. But don't. In conversations where you nod instead of respond. In situations where something feels wrong, yet you remain silent. Not because you don't care, but because something inside you has learned that expression carries risk. So the emotion stays trapped between feeling and suppression. And over time, that trapped energy begins to take different forms. It can become exhaustion, a kind of emotional fatigue that has no clear source. It can become irritability, where small things trigger disproportionate reactions. Or even numbness, where nothing seems to move you at all. Have you ever felt tired, without doing anything physical? Have you ever felt disconnected, even in the presence of others? That is the weight of unexpressed emotion, because holding everything inside requires effort, constant effort, a quiet vigilance over what is allowed to surface and what must remain hidden. And the longer this continues, the more confusing it becomes. You may start to question your own depth, wonder if something is missing, if you are less emotional than others. But the truth is often the opposite. You are not feeling less. You are feeling without release. And that creates a kind of pressure that is difficult to name, but impossible to ignore. A silent tension that exists not in the world around you, but within you. Awareness rarely arrives as a loud revelation. It does not announce itself. It emerges quietly, often disguised as a question you cannot ignore anymore. It may begin with a subtle feeling of distance, a sense that something in your life is being experienced, but not truly felt. You move through conversations, responsibilities, even relationships, yet something feels slightly out of reach. Not broken, just incomplete. And then, slowly, the noticing begins. You notice how often you say, "I'm fine," without checking if it's true. How quickly you shift away from anything that feels emotionally demanding. How unfamiliar certain feelings seem, even when they belong to you. There is no dramatic moment, no sudden clarity, just a growing awareness that your inner world has been quiet for a long time. And with that awareness comes discomfort, because once you begin to see it, you cannot unsee it. You may start to question things you never questioned before. Why is it hard to explain what you feel? Why do certain conversations feel exhausting? Why does emotional closeness feel both desired and avoided? This is the turning point, not because everything changes, but because something becomes visible. And visibility changes everything, because what was once automatic begins to feel intentional. Silence is no longer just how you are, it becomes something you are doing. And that realization can feel unsettling. There may be moments where you want to express something, but don't know how. Moments where emotion rises, but feels unfamiliar, almost intrusive. You might even pull back further at first, because awareness does not immediately create comfort. It often creates tension, a gap between what you are used to and what you are beginning to recognize. But within that tension is something important, possibility, because the moment you become aware of a pattern, you are no longer fully controlled by it. You begin to stand slightly outside of it, observing rather than just reacting. And in that quiet observation, a new question begins to form. Not what's wrong with me, but something far more honest. What have I been holding that I never allowed myself to feel? Reconnection does not begin with clarity. It begins with unfamiliarity. When emotions have been distant for a long time, their return does not feel comforting. It feels uncertain, sometimes even overwhelming. What was once suppressed does not come back in perfect order. It arrives in fragments, in waves, in moments that feel difficult to understand. And so, the first experience of feeling again is often not relief. It is confusion. You may notice emotions appearing without clear reason, a heaviness that lingers without explanation, a sudden sensitivity to things that once felt neutral. This is not regression. It is reawakening, because the emotional system, once given even a small space, begins to respond. Slowly at first, then more consistently. And with that response comes a challenge. You are now feeling something, but you do not yet know how to stay with it. The old pattern still exists, the instinct to suppress, to distract, to move away. So there is hesitation. You might question whether it is better to return to silence, whether expression is worth the discomfort it brings. But something inside you has already shifted, because once awareness begins, complete disconnection is no longer possible. So instead of forcing expression, something gentler starts to take place. Observation. You begin to sit with emotions even briefly, not to fix them, not to analyze them, but simply to notice. A feeling arises, and instead of pushing it away immediately, you allow it to exist for a moment longer than before. That moment matters, because it introduces something new into the pattern. Space. And within that space, something subtle begins to grow. Familiarity. Emotions start to feel less foreign, less intrusive, still uncomfortable at times, but no longer entirely avoided. You begin to recognize them, even if you cannot yet express them. And that recognition is a form of connection. A quiet rebuilding of a relationship that was once interrupted. Not through force, not through sudden change, but through small, consistent moments of allowing. Because learning to feel again is not about becoming someone new. It is about slowly returning to something that was always there, waiting patiently beneath the silence. There is no dramatic ending to this process. No moment where everything suddenly aligns and the silence disappears completely. What changes instead is your relationship with it. Because silence in itself was never the problem. It was the absence of choice within it. And slowly that begins to shift. You may still find yourself quiet in certain moments, still reflective, still observant, but now there is awareness behind it. A quiet understanding of what is being felt, even if it is not always spoken. And that changes the nature of silence. It is no longer a place where emotions are hidden. It becomes a space where emotions can exist without urgency. Expression, too, begins to take a different form. Not loud, not overwhelming, but intentional. A word shared when it matters. A feeling acknowledged instead of dismissed. A moment of honesty that would have once been avoided. These are not dramatic transformations. They are subtle returns. Have you noticed how something feels different now? Not necessarily easier, but clearer? Because clarity does not remove discomfort. It removes confusion. You begin to understand your own emotional patterns. Recognize when you are holding back, and when you are choosing to remain quiet. And that distinction is important, because it restores something that was once missing. Agency. You are no longer reacting from old patterns alone. You are responding with awareness. And in that awareness, something gentle begins to emerge. Trust. Not in others necessarily, but in yourself. Trust that you can feel without losing control. That emotions can exist without overwhelming you. That expression does not always lead to harm. This trust does not arrive all at once. It builds quietly, through moments of honesty, through small acts of presence, through allowing yourself to exist emotionally without judgment. And in that quiet rebuilding, something begins to return. Not a new version of you, but a more complete one. Someone who still understands silence, but is no longer defined by it. If something in this reflection felt familiar, if parts of this silence felt like your own, then what you've experienced is not emptiness. It is something that once had to stay hidden, and you are not alone in that. There are many who move through the world this way, feeling deeply but quietly, holding more than they show, carrying emotions that never quite found their way into words. And maybe, for a long time, that felt like the only way to be. But even the quietest parts of you deserve to be acknowledged. Even the emotions you cannot yet explain still matter. If you'd like to stay connected to this kind of space, a place where these hidden patterns are explored with care, without judgment, you are always welcome here. And if you feel comfortable, you can share your experience below. Not because you have to, but because sometimes your words might help someone else feel a little less alone in their silence. Take care of yourself.